This training is open to anybody. I shared the email invite with all your editors as well as in Slack. So if there's anyone who wants to jump on from anywhere else in your world, please go for it. I'm recording, and Laura is giving us a tour of the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom.
I'm at an elementary school right now.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
The life of an engagement producer, editor. So anyway, I want to go ahead and just quickly introduce our panelists. This is going to be kind of a casual panel, but it would also be awesome if, to save time, instead of going around the whole room, if you could put in the chat, your name and where you are in terms of your station or organization, that would be great. And then as we go along, we'll, if you have a question, or can I turn off the doorbell sound? I don't know. Does anybody know how to do that? Turn off the doorbell sound?
Hey. No, I'm saying, hey, I'm on.
I'm sorry, Gabe, I don't know how to turn off the doorbell sound. Hopefully more people will not, well, we want more people to come, but I think we get here quickly. So anyway, I will start, we're going to start off our discussion today with Matt. Matt, can you give us, and I'm talking now, Matt S. in Iowa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Matt Siren. I'm a digital manager here at Iowa Public Radio. I'm responsible for our overall digital audience growth and audience growth strategy and shepherding them through their experience with us.
Awesome. And if you're just joining us, yeah, please put your name and where you are in the chat. Great, appreciate it. Let's go to Gabe. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Gabe. At least I can't. That's Gabe. Okay. We will. He's at KCUR. Laura?
Hi, yeah, I'm Laura Hamden. I'm the engagement editor at St. Louis Public Radio. Yeah.
Awesome. And let's also introduce our friends from NPR. We have Britt.
Hi, I'm Britt Chang. I'm a analyst at NPR.
Excellent. And let's see. Oh, there's Matt. Matt A.
Hey, I'm Matt Adams, acting supervisor for audience engagement at NPR.
Very good. Well, we wanted to pull this together to talk about some new things and refresh some old things or some classics. So I'm going to start with Matt. Matt, I'm going to pull up I'm going to share my screen here and pull up your first slide, which is called the audience journey. Just a second here. Make sure I got this right. Did everyone see that?
I can see it here. Perfect. So here at Iowa Public Radio, about a year ago, we really re-looked at our total audience journey, the audience experience with us. And we took the approach of no matter where you are, no matter what you're looking for with us, what can you get with us and how can we build our relationship with you? Which is really, when we talk digitally, the core of it all is building the relationship with your audience. And a lot of, you've probably seen the audience funnel or the audience pyramid or different variations on that. And as we looked at it, we said, really what you want to do is you want to build a loyalty loop. You want to build an experience where they can stay there and just come back over and over and over, where they've got trust in you and they just want to continue to engage with you. So our marketing manager, Jordan Bonson, and I worked together and designed this visual for it. The visual is actually his creation, but the core components of this play out for you no matter where you are in the experience. So when you think about an audience finding or engaging with us, the very first thing is, do they have awareness? Do they know who you are? And when you're working on building audience, you have to start with, they have no idea who we are. You have to presume that they've never seen our content. So awareness is really at the top of it. And again, in the funnel experience, you'd see it at the top of the funnel, basically. That's where you layer in search results. That's where you might have your social content, whatever that might be. And for us, the awareness, really your trigger for that is I want to discover. So think about it from the audience perspective. I want, or I have a need for this. And then after that first exposure point, if we do it right, then you start to develop interest in it. You now have an awareness for us. Now you want to take the next step. You want to learn more, or you need to learn more, or whatever that particular component might be. And then you enter the loyalty loop, which is now we move from interest to preference. Now I want to stay informed and I want to stay connected. I want to know about Iowa Public Radio. I want to make it part of my habit. So we're moving also from passive or immediate needs-based audience work to audience identification, self-volunteerism, basically identifying themselves. And that's where subscription comes in. I want to hear from you. I want to subscribe to your newsletters. I want to subscribe to your podcasts. I want your content in front of me. I want it to be in my feed regularly. And as you do that over time, you then move into membership. So it kind of moves from that content delivery, content creation side to the full experience with us. And that's membership. I want to believe. And that starts to move from the needs-based on your part to what you want to give back to us, essentially. And then from there, we move to retention. We want to keep you coming back over and over and over. We want to stay your habit. You've made us our habit. Now we want you to stay with us. I want to make an impact. I want to be there with you. And then there's also kind of this extra little leg on the right-hand side on advocacy. Certain individuals are going to want to be more engaged in a different way with us. I want to spread the word. I want to be your street team. I want to be your cheerleader out in the community, basically. If you want to go to the next slide, Holly. Oh, actually, let's go back to the audience journey and go to page 2. Sorry. So then you take the visualization and then you apply it to your channels, to your platforms. So, and you look at this one, you've got those different steps in the audience experience, the audience journey at the top. And then you've got your channels and tactics, you've got your opportunity metrics. For us, awareness, again, thinking at the top of the funnel, that's when I have a need. I need to find out information on this. So you search. That's where we layer in paid social opportunities or paid media, earned media, working with NPR to put our content in front of you when you need it or to make it available to a wider audience. Under interest, radio, website, NPR One, you're finding us on some of the big funnel parts more directly now. And you see that interest and preference continues forward. You layer more things in on preference. You add the app because at that point you're more engaged. You add podcasts because you're responding to particular content. Subscriptions, then again, that's newsletters. Those can be collected through social. That's on your website as well. Subscriptions also include podcasts. Membership, and I think everybody kind of recognizes the second half of this as well. Pledge drive, emails, events, those opportunities to engage with us actively. When you then get down to the bottom 2 rows of this one, your opportunity metrics, that aligns your KPIs, your key performance indicators across each step of this. So now you're able to track from the start of the life cycle to the end of that journey or that life cycle there. How are you doing in growing audience? How are you doing in exposure to audience? And that's where those different descriptors line up in there. So that's kind of the high level visualization for it. Holly, then if you go to the journey flow, the second part looks at it practically. You know, we call it the internet, the World Wide Web, because it is a web. It's all intermixed. And this one intentionally looks like this. I call it my circuit board. If you, and we can send this out so you can look at it afterwards in closer detail. But at the top, you have your total potential digital audience, your total potential audience. And you think about where are the points where they start engaging with you and what do you want them to do? What is the core of what you want out of them? For us, that big step is subscribing to a newsletter. Because when I have your email address, when you share your name with me, you're actively saying, I want information from you right in front of me every day. So for us, the bottom right is the goal, subscribes to newsletter. For some stations, it might be subscribes to podcasts, or it could be comes to the website regularly, whatever that particular is. Make that your goal, and then think through what are the tracks someone can have on this journey, and recognize, and what makes this a circuit board is you can go back and forth across all of these. At the top, you've got options like listening to NPR One, or listening to Iowa Public Radio on air, or listening to the digital stream, or thinking about when we're on socials. You find us on social, you stay on social. What do we do to move you from there? You move back there. How do you see us when you're there? And when you go back and forth through the experiences. You have things like layering in influencers. How can an influencer amplify? How can an influencer take your content further or put it in front of other people? And you just kind of move through that circuit board and just think about the audience journey as that life cycle of each moment's a touch point. They're always moving around in those touch points. So how do you get the content in front of them with enough frequency and regularity for them to take that action you want and subscribe to newsletter, subscribe to podcast, whatever that is. And that's, from our perspective, that's the journey, and that's the experience that I've put in place at the high level for us to think through and to drive that audience growth with us. And that's what I've got.
Thanks, Matt. Any questions? Just feel free to jump in if there's any questions. I have a question. To what degree was creating this approach kind of a station-wide buy-in, and or how do colleagues that are more on the radio side understand this? What feedback have you gotten from the audio folks?
Sure. The first step was for me just laying out visually what is the experience, recognizing the audience where they are, the experience they want to build for themselves, and putting us in front of them, and then just layering it out. Then we reviewed this with Michael, with Catherine, with our news director, our program director, our music director, kind of really that core senior team, and talked through the steps, the experience, and just how it all flows and fits together in kind of that business model perspective. And then at least once a year, I try to do an all staff training, at least with their content creators, to go through, and we presented this to staff and received questions there. It's by and large been received pretty well. At this point, it feels like it's not so much groundbreaking as it is just, it's a reflection of reality, and seeing it visually is pretty easy to understand and process that way. The next step past that, so with that journey in place, then the next step is, okay, now we apply it to the content we're creating. When you create a web post, where does it belong? When you create a web post, how do we make sure that it's seen in search results? How do we make sure that it's ready when someone needs that information? How do we get it out there at the top of the funnel or at the top of the journey to build those exposure points? And then how do we layer in at the same time the asks to subscribe, the asks to take that next step in your journey, essentially. And so that's where digital layers in to help support that and move that forward. And we work with our content creators on making sure your content is optimized. We say optimized, making sure that it's ready for that audience, and doing our part. And really, at the end of the day, it's our part. All of our content is more successful when it's seen by more eyes. So let's all work together to make it seen by more people, and have a greater impact.
That's really cool. I can see this as something too that people can adapt to organizations of many sizes, depending on what your goal is, what your outcome is, which is very cool. I'm thinking in terms of collaborations. We have Side Effects with us here. They have a newsletter, sort of getting that piece of loyalty, that what you really want to do is get that email address. I think we have a question from Britt.
Yeah, hey Matt. This was really beautifully visualized. I think it was really easy to understand. And that's something I think about a lot, is like, how do you present these like somewhat complex ideas and just lay it out so it's less scary?
Right.
One thing I'm curious about from the work you've done is how much of a responsibility do you all put on, let's say, like the reporters versus, the audience people around? Is it like 10% and 90%? Is it 50-50? What does that look like?
So all of our reporters, all of our content creators are responsible for creating their base web post, their content. It's their material. They need to present it. My digital producers will come in and help with visualizations. We have also kind of an intake form of if you need photo support, if you need video support, those resources live on my team. So we get that info. If the dates line up, then we go out and we support with that. Otherwise, we also own the photo asset library and we go through our archive and look for what's useful there. So we work with the reporter on that part of it. The content is reviewed and edited by Michael, our news director, and then published from there. And as part of that last step in the publishing, digital comes back and we layer in the SEO pieces. We look for the headline structure, we look for the slug structure, we look for the search description. We've got our own kind of digital editor checklist that we manage as a team. So we look at it as we support the content creators in their work, and then we layer in the digital components that elevate them from there. And I don't know that I could put a rough percent on it, but that's kind of the line that we put in there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. As we go along, if something for Matt occurs to you later, please put it in the chat and we can address it. But I do want to keep us moving along here. So from audience and the journey, we're going to go to a content journey, a SEO journey from Des Moines down to Kansas City, Missouri. And there we have Gabe. One of the things that I appreciate about KCUR is that we have a headline workshopping Slack channel, and people are active in it. So if I'm needing some help with a headline, there are other eyes on it to help me figure out not only the SEO, but is this just a good headline? And there's other wonders that Gabe is going to share with us. So take it away, Gabe. Let me know when you want me to share your screen. Should I share it now?
Yeah, start sharing. Also, can everyone hear me all right? My audio back. I'm seeing some nods, so I'm gonna assume yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Well, Holly, if you want to throw that presentation up. I'm gonna sort of emphasize some parts of this presentation and maybe we'll speed through others. Because I want to connect it to what you just heard from Matt about the audience journey. When we're talking about web writing, we're really talking about often the beginning of the funnel. So much of what we do for writing on web is capturing people who are, in many cases, stumbling across our content. We're writing news, we're writing stories, hopefully with the goals of not just, getting information out to everyone who's already following everything we do breathlessly, but to try and get new audiences, to try and get information out to more people and through the different ways in which people consume information. Sometimes that's stumbling across it on social media. Sometimes, a lot of the time, that is through places like Google, where they're searching for the answers to their questions. So whenever we're writing stories, whenever we're publishing anything, I like to start with two really big questions for any story and then two follow-up questions. So the first off is, who is my audience? What do they need and what are they looking for? This is sort of like your big picture question for sort of any story, any piece you're publishing, but also like, any audio radio feature you are doing, any podcast you're putting out. We sort of can't get to every single person in the world with one story. Sometimes broadcast big tent media like NPR, we like to think that like, oh yeah, this story is really for anyone who wants information about anything and everyone will read it. But in reality, that's not true. We are, writing stories that sometimes we're writing, let's say, a voter guide for Kansas City residents specifically. Sometimes we're writing a story that speaks to everyone who is new to one particular neighborhood. Sometimes we're writing a story about Missouri politics with the idea that like, okay, people who aren't from Missouri are going to be reading this. that informs the context that we include, the way that we phrase things, how we sort of bill a story. And there might be different audiences that we are targeting with every story, with one particular story. But we always have to keep those in mind. Who is my end reader? Is it young people or is it old people? Is it people who are going to or in retirement and need this specific advice? Or is it young people just out of college who need help navigating the world? We can't assume that everyone knows everything or knows the context from where we're coming at. But sometimes we're writing a story that like is specifically for people who already were following a particular thread. So we need to keep our audience in mind always. Then the second sort of batch of questions is, okay, we've got our audience in mind. What is most relevant to them and how can we make them care? This is the element that I think speaks to sort of the top of the funnel thing that I really want to get to, which is how do we make anyone care about anything that we are doing? So much that is our problem. Like, you know, we are sort of sending out news and sending out information, stories into what feels like a void. How do we get people to care and want to engage with us? You know, we're sort of long past the point where simply reporting a story that we think is interesting is enough to make anyone who's not a journalist interested in that. So always be thinking about, from headline to photo to how you write, how do we get people to care? And part of that is making this matter, making our web writing matter. So Holly, if you want to move on. Next slide. Okay, headlines are everything. Holly mentioned the headline channel that we have at KCOR. What I love about that is I think we've created a culture where people are spending a good amount of time workshopping a headline and trying to make it better. And we're asking tough questions and trying all different sorts of arrangements because sometimes a headline is all you've got. And if your headline isn't good, then I'm sorry, no one's reading your story. We want people to read our stories. We want people to care. That's why headlines, to me, headlines are sometimes the most important thing about your story. You could put months of work into a really great investigation. And if the headline communicates to people that it doesn't matter to them, no one's going to read that work. We want people to read that work. So here I have two headlines picked out from KCOR's reporting. One, I admit I wrote, the other I did not. And I wanted to sort of shout out what I think makes both of these really great for different reasons. The first is a story from Peggy Lowe, our sort of criminal justice reporter at KCOR. That is like, this was sort of a day turn story. But to me, it's got impact, it's got action verbs, it's got everything good. Kansas City police targeted minority neighborhoods to meet illegal ticket quotas, lawsuit says. You're fitting a whole lot of information in a really short space. You've got, okay, who is the subject? Kansas City police. What is the action they are doing? Targeted minority neighborhoods. That's the who is being impacted by this. But then you've also got the why and the sort of element of why is this interesting to meet illegal ticket quotas. You've got sort of like who is being hurt by this, and then what is sort of the extra bit of interest of, okay, they're meeting quotas that are illegal. So you've got sort of the impact, the meaning in there. And then at the very end, it sort of attributes to a lawsuit. So that's sort of the okay, what's the news part of this? This is a really strong way of presenting what could have been a pretty bland legal story. I mean, if you think about so many of the headlines you read about lawsuits of drivers allege that Kansas City police were giving out too many tickets. There's so many bland ways of telling this story. This packed in with action verbs and all like used every bit of its space to make what was a really strong and then very successful headline for a, you know, a legal story. And then the second one is a little bit more fun. This was based off of a Reddit thread where I had two of our reporters, Salisa and Savannah, sort of dig into this question of like, okay, what are the worst intersections in Kansas City that people were talking about? They sort of not just looked and like literally stood at the corner of these intersections to figure out what were the traffic problems, but then sort of dug into the infrastructure issues and city management concerns and like the money that was going into fixing bad intersections and the public safety danger. This is a whole long explainer about intersections, and but it was based off of a Reddit thread, and you know, we were able to get those Redditors interested in this story also, but it sort of has this a little bit of a cheeky tone about the sort of exasperation that Kansas Cityans feel of like, well, what's the worst intersection in Kansas City? All of them. There are so many terrible intersections. And our story then goes into why. But, you know, instead of sort of doing a like Kansas City intersections, you know, are plagued by bad design, we want something that would spark conversation and that would present the question that was already being asked, and then in a way sort of answer that. I mean, all of them seems cheeky, but it's, you know, if you drive around here, it feels true. And also we've got the data to back it up. There's a whole lot of bad intersections. So that's one where we felt pretty comfortable going with a little bit more funny, and it paid off for us. So Holly, next one. All right, this is a lot of text on the page. And these slides are all available to people after. But I just want to sort of present a lot of questions to ask about a headline. Every story is different. Every story has got so many elements and stuff. The thing we're always dealing with is like, okay, how do we capture the complexities of the story in a headline? And so the things I want you to be doing is not to come away with necessarily, here's your basic tips, although the next slide is those basic tips. But when someone puts a headline in our headline help channel, what I am doing to start with is I'm asking a bunch of questions. Some of these are to myself and some of these to the reporter. What is the tone of this story? Is this very serious? Or is this sort of like the intersections one, where we can have a little bit more fun? Or is it more sort of explanatory? Who's the intended audience? Are they people who live and know this area and we can be very specific about, you know, on Prospect Avenue? Or is it going to be an issue that will have national appeal? So we'll say a Missouri town or a Kansas City, you know, parts of Kansas City or something like that. What is the clear focus or takeaway of the story? What is the one thing you want people to go into knowing or going into thinking about or come away from? And if it's one of these stories where it's sort of like ambiguous, how can you remove some of the element? Like I'm thinking about a story of like Kansas News Service had a really good story summarizing a bunch of different vetoes from the governor, veto overrides. And they put in the headline just the two probably most grabby and attention ones, which were on transgender and abortion rights. So they narrowed down a lot of topics to two very clear like topics and a sort of trend. And then the rest they just saved for the story. The thinking is you cannot summarize an entire 500 word, 1,000 word story in a headline. So don't try. Get the most important thing, the most new or surprising or interesting thing that will get people to click in the first place. Because again, attention is fleeting and very valuable. So how do you get people in? And then you'll give them the rest of the story and they'll get that context and stuff. Why will this matter to anyone? Or how can I make it matter? You know, what is the emotion of the story? What is sort of like the the vastness of the problem? What is the human impact of the thing? How is it, how are humans feeling this? Like, is there pain? Is there joy? And why are we as a news organization reporting this in the first place? If you don't have a good answer for why we're reporting this, then why are you doing this story in the first place? How do we make this matter or feel like it matters? And then we get to the specifics. What are the details that will make my headlines pop? Is there a quote that captures the sort of humanity of the reporting? Or is there like a number, a fact, a percentage that will sort of drive home the scale of this problem or of the solution? Again, how do we make it matter? And then sort of the writing advice, does your headline have a clear subject, verb, object? There's always people at the end or beginning of all of these stories. Someone is doing something to someone, and so how can you avoid passive voices, Holly put, but then how can you bring home the human impact and always keep that in mind? Often when I'm sort of fixing or trying to get people to fix what I see as bad headlines is because humans are nowhere to be found. And there's always humans in your stories.
Are you really
gonna watch this?
I'm working through it, so.
I see.
You good, Scott?
Oh, shoot.
Oops.
All right, Holly.
Well, maybe you can mute you. Okay, go ahead.
Next slide. Okay, I want to wrap up so we can get to the rest of the presentation pretty soon. But with headlines and stuff, I just wanted to sort of point out to, display headlines, SEO headlines, and custom URLs. Again, these are all tools in your tool belt, and especially for all the Grove stations, this is made very easy to do. Again, you've got all these different ways to get people to find and come into contact with your story. So this is an example of a story that we put out with where everything was customized. The headline that you saw like on our website and on Facebook, Missouri started selling recreational weed 1 month ago. How's it going so far? Again, one of these complicated stories with like, oh, there's all sorts of different like trends and sales and numbers and stuff. And, we're trying to get this question out there that we think people will have, which was like, how is legal weed going in Missouri now that it's legal? But to really optimize how we come across in search, what we ended up doing is changing the SEO headline, which is, if you're in Grove, it's on that second tab while you're editing a story, to put legal weed in Missouri at the very front, and then how recreational marijuana is faring, or I forget the rest of that story. But thinking of like, okay, if you are in Missouri or if you're in a place neighboring Missouri, you're probably going to be just Googling Missouri legal weed to either try and find and buy some or find out more about it. And so we positioned the story as something that like, okay, here's our answers to a bunch of these questions. And I yesterday went into incognito mode in Google and just did a Missouri legal weed, and is basically the third item there. The very first news story is this story is still getting thousands of views a week, even like 2 months after it came out. We also adjusted the custom URL, which is for Grove users, the slug field, to put sort of the big elements at the very front, legal weed Missouri. And Holly, I think we're just gonna have to skip all the nut graph stuff because that's a whole other training for another time. But I just sort of wanted to stay on sort of headlines and this idea of how do we make our stories matter to people, and then how do we get those in front of them hook them into the audience funnel by making our work matter to people.
This is
So
good.
if we stay with headlines and stuff, if anyone has questions, I think we can go there now.
And I will say that one of St. Louis Public Radio's all-time greatest hits headlines is how to get a Missouri Real ID. I think that Lara can attest that it keeps, that SEO just keeps giving. And I believe St. Louis Public Radio also regularly uses the SEO field in Grove for most of their stories. Is that right, Lara? Right, if you're with us? Any questions? Are there any more slides on headlines, Gabe, or should I exit?
No, I think you're good to exit out.
Okay. And I will be sharing this, and Gabe will share, I'll share Gabe's slides. And so if you do have the questions that you didn't get answered about nut grass and so forth, I'm sure Gabe would be happy to answer those for you. But I think that simple things like, focusing on that subject verb situation, taking out extraneous passive voice as kind of construction, and then really thinking about who you're trying to reach, because you can't reach everybody. Those are some really good takeaways there. Anything that is correct. SEO heads, yep, they do have SEO heads for just about every story. Any questions or anything that anybody would like to add about any tips that they have for headlines or questions at this point? Why do cows moo? Here are a few reasons. Exactly. I mean, that says it all. Of course, you need to answer the question in the story. That's it. Don't be giving it all the old bait and switch. Nothing will let people leave your audience journey faster than the bait and switch, I think. Awesome. So if Lara is on, I know she's juggling a couple of things at the moment. Is she here? I don't see her on my screen, but maybe we can jump ahead to talking a little bit about some other platforms. And I've asked Matt and Britt from NPR to kind of set the stage. There are lots of platforms, and they seem to have changing algorithms and prerogatives all the time. So we thought we'd just open that up for discussion, but I thought maybe Britt and Matt Adams could set the stage a little bit for maybe talking about NPR's thinking about Reddit, TikTok, and good old Facebook at this point.
Yeah, I can start. So you've probably heard the news that we're not on Twitter anymore. So we've made that decision for all of our 52 brand accounts. And we're slowly starting to look at other platforms that we might want to engage more. One of those places is definitely Reddit. When I first started at NPR about 3 years ago, I was doing a lot more Reddit AMAs there, and then I got into Twitter Spaces, and I kind of moved away from Reddit, and I didn't really have much time to continue to work on it. But I think now that we've gone quiet on Twitter, we're going to start trying to figure out what that next platform is going to look like. And I think Reddit is going to be a place that we might move forward with more engagement there. And where Reddit could probably play really well for member stations is in their subreddits. And so subreddits are like their own smaller communities within Reddit. And there's a lot of local ties there. And I feel like member stations can do a really good job by getting into local subreddits for your area, communities, just a different place that you can drop news and do things there to kind of engage with those audience members that are on this platform. For us, we found places like Our Politics, which is a great subreddit for just politics talk, as really loves to watch Shindesk work that we have here. So we've actually started to reach out to the moderators of that subreddit to talk about sharing some of our work there. Now, Reddit's a little bit different than other platforms. You don't just drop random links in. You don't really like go there to start posting things. You kind of got to get permission to do that and start to build a voice and build a presence there. And that's something that we're slowly starting to work on at NPR. We haven't done that before. We had just done AMAs, which are open conversations on Reddit, but we've actually started to now develop a voice there and start to get into subreddits, talk to moderators, and drop some of our work there. AMAs are someplace that we want to build as well. When I started here, we were doing a lot with the Life Kit team, working with a lot of experts and offering advice on certain episodes that they had. But it's also been a place where some of our hosts have started to join. We just did one with Ari Shapiro recently that did very well. We also did one with the investigative team about a story they did on executioners and how their worldview changed after doing this job. And that got over 600 comments and questions that were coming in. So it did very, very well. And there is a hunger there on Reddit to talk to a lot of our reporters, offer more transparency, just offer a chance to just like interact more with that community there. So that's what NPR is going to be trying to do more on that platform moving forward. With Facebook, this is a platform that, although the algorithm is starting to change and we're not seeing as much traffic being driven there, we're still sharing our work there. We're still trying to figure out what that audience will be into and what we want to do there. Especially a lot of our breaking news is still doing well on Facebook. A lot of our politics Washington desk work is doing well. But we've also found out that reels are doing well on Facebook, and we're actually doing an experiment with our visuals team, sharing more reels that were being made for Instagram to share and cross post on our Facebook page. And we're actually seeing those are getting prioritized more and are getting a larger reach with the audience there. So we're doing this for about like another month, and we're going to take a step back and look at the data and see if it makes sense or not. So that's something else we're experimenting with moving forward. So there's a lot more other platforms out there. And I would say my team is kind of doing like a listening tour of just seeing what the other platforms are out there, what they offer, and what might make more sense. So as we start to investigate these other platforms, we will let member stations know if we decide to put more effort there or what we might try to do. But I will say you will still see us doing more of an effort in Reddit in the next few months. So you will see us doing more there. But other platforms like Mastodon or T2 or places like that, we've had conversations, but I don't think we're ready to dive in there yet. So those are something we're still thinking about moving forward. But if anything changes, we'll definitely alert everybody as new strategies inform based on those platforms.
Britt, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I just wanted to call out, Gabe had a really fantastic example of how to use Reddit for social listening.
Yeah, I can talk a minute about that. The thing I like about Reddit, and I've been using Reddit on and off for a handful of years, is that local communities are very powerful for local public media stations. I mean, our politics is huge, but one of the great things about Reddit is that even more powerfully than Facebook, even more powerfully than Twitter, a local story can get shared and brought into these national spaces. So it's a place for local stories to really take off. So I've had a lot of success just sort of being myself. I mean, I'm pretty transparent about being like, hey, I'm Journo Gabe. Like I am who I am. Like that's been my strategy since back in, Ohio. But one of the things that I try and do when I look at Reddit pretty regularly is I'm looking at especially the Kansas City subreddit, which is a very active community for both showing off things to do in Kansas City and the news happening there, and also complaining about Kansas City like any good local does. And one of the things I came across was a very funny thread about like what are the most cursed intersections in Kansas City, and there's a whole great discussion with people like bringing up their least favorite intersections. And my thought was like, I feel like there's something there, and I'm sort of curious about how we quantify this. And I know this like conversation will have like expand larger than just Reddit people, because everyone who's driven in Kansas City has dealt with these bad intersections. And so that was one where we sort of like, we looked through the comments and gathered a bunch of like suggestions there and sent two of our reporters who are really into infrastructure and public transit stuff to those intersections to sort of describe what they're like. Our story, and this is a very much like the Harkin model that I've used before in past jobs, where it's like community members have a question and you answer it, like, why are these intersections so cursed? And so we gave credit to the community in the the lead of our story and used some of those comments, and then posted it back in that community in the r/Kansas City, and had another good discussion with people sort of reacting to that and sort of appreciating us like one, taking their, concerns and annoyances seriously, but then two, actually finding the answers to some of these questions, which is like, what's being done to fix this? So that was a really great example of taking the pulse of the city on Reddit, even though it is sort of, more anonymous usually than other platforms. Still a really great place to sort of interact with very legitimate and very often local concerns.
And it strikes me that with those local concerns and local interests, when we think about our limited resources and time, maybe that is where we can invest some time if we're looking for stories that are really going to hit the mark. I mean, oftentimes we're kind of thinking we know, but I think we're pretty spot on a lot of the time in our audiences and what they want. But this is one that we know there's at least some people out there who are manic about the topic and really want to know and really would appreciate getting some answers. And I love the full circle of this project because we started with social talking and we ended up with social talking. And in the meantime, great journalism happened that was responsive. And so I think that's a really cool model. And again, thinking about where to put your time and your resources, it could be something that is worth exploring. Does anybody else have questions about Reddit or anything to share that maybe you've dabbled in it personally or professionally and wasn't a great experience, or you didn't feel it was something that is worth doing? I'm interested to hear if anyone else has any comments.
I think Reddit can be a good source of stories that you might choose to cover that you might not have heard about. It's another ear out there, but that's very, very narrow casting. I mean, I remember being on Reddit 15 years ago or something when it kind of started. It was the front page of the web. And yes, there are people who are very dedicated, and there are some people who are very much on it. More my concern, at least with St. Louis Public Radio and NPR member stations, all that all around, is making sure you show up on the second or first largest search engine that exists on the internet, and that's YouTube. And I'm wondering what does NPR do to kind of make sure that they're shown there? Because I started off in radio. I started off in the 90s in radio. I've been all over the place. I've done a whole bunch of different stuff, but I've also done stuff with TV and with visuals. And I understand that Instagram and Reels and all that stuff is important. But when we have almost no presence on YouTube with the stories and the hard work that we're doing with the reporting, I'm just wondering how that's getting figured into the mix that we have. And it makes no sense to have no presence there. And I understand a lot of people are actively kind of against it, or else they don't want to be involved in what they see as TV news, because TV news can be absolutely horrible. They just show pictures and they're doing no reporting. But there are other ways to get it done as well, even given the stills. Even if you just have stills and you're videoizing them, and you make sure you tag and you categorize and everything else that you would post on a website as well. I would hope, and I've mentioned that to the members to St. Louis Public Radio, but I want to say it out loud here, just as some Gen Xer, because I think it's very important to be there, and to not be there, I think it's not doing your job as a journalist. It's just not. And to learn how to make sure that you're presenting it so that people there will find it in a different way than what's being done on broadcast media, I think it's important. So I just want to say it out loud. And I think Reddit is good for what it is, but I think not having a presence on the second largest search engine on the planet, I think, is kind of a mistake. So
what is NPR's thinking about YouTube? Has there ever been a discussion about it?
Yeah, so just for some context, hang on, let me turn my video off so the audio is better. Just so for some context, Matt and I have no control over our YouTube presence. We don't create content for it. All we can do is sort of just recommend. And so I really want to validate what Rod was saying, which is that, yes, YouTube is the second largest presence search engine. It's also actually the largest social media platform that people are on. Most people think that's Facebook, but it's actually YouTube. Everybody's on YouTube. And so that is where you're going to get the most diverse, wide-ranging group of people possible. And over time, also, like, people are searching more for news on YouTube than ever before. We know a lot of our TV station counterparts, they have it a little bit easier than us, where they can just, like, live stream and things like that. That said, NPR is looking to focus more on where we can use our resources more effectively. So let's say if we have visual podcasts, we're turning a lot more of our podcasts into visuals too. And so turning those into like shorts and experimenting with that. So far, the results have been kind of mixed, partly because there is a lot of competition already on YouTube. A lot of other podcasts have gotten on YouTube faster than us. And so what we've seen with shorts is that sometimes it can be like feast or famine. So some view counts are like in the hundreds, but some are in like 500,000 range, and it really, really varies. And so if anybody on the station side has cracked the code, we'd love to hear it, and then pass it along to our YouTube team.
Well, again, I think that this is what the work I've done independently with smaller businesses and smaller and larger businesses as well. A lot of times, especially if the story is big enough or has more of a national or more global appeal, you might not get that initial hit if you're not getting it up quickly enough. But what happens is, because people use YouTube just as a search engine, they're just looking up stuff. If that story comes back around, or if it's not something that is something that's a little more evergreen, or else the subject comes back up and they go back to find it, if yours is there, they're going to look at it, and then that'll connect them into all the rest of the loop of what your station and everything else has to offer. And the payoff might not be immediate, but the payoff might come down the line. And if you're not even laying down the trail behind you, then you're missing out on it. It's the web for a reason, and you could have one little thread, and if you keep following it, and if people find out you have the story and the interest, and there's a visual, and even if it's not, oh, we don't have super HD 4K, blah blah blah, you don't need to have all that. If you don't have the content there and it's not there, then people don't think you're real. And whether that hurts or not, I think a lot of people don't think it's real if you don't exist there. So thank you.
Good. I think that Daniel put in the chat that, well, Nebraska Public Media is a dual licensee, and so they have natural video content to work with. I think Gabe mentioned, again, it's a resource issue in some places. It may be a situation where we know that these things work. We have this much bandwidth for experimentation. We're going to use that bandwidth to try this thing right now, maybe this another time. But certainly, I would love if anyone has other examples that we can share with the group at some point of a local station that's not a PBS dual licensee, but is an audio and digital organization that uses YouTube in some way that's consistent and effective. Again, you also don't want to be in a place that you can't sustain and you can't manage because of resources. So I think that is, if you are already doing things like reels and stories, maybe there's a way to create a workflow where you can start putting that stuff on YouTube as an experiment. Let me see what Britt's comment was here. I can also see a world where if you're creating video content just to test and push your reels. Yeah, that's a good thought as well. I have a question here from Fred in St. Louis, but before I answer that question, Fred, I want to set the stage a little bit for reels and stories with Lara, who's done a lot of this from doing videos in the field, like storytelling in the field around a audio and digital story, to having reporters hold a mic in front of their phone and share some insights. So Lara, talk to us a little bit about what you've done and what you've learned.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry I was in and out earlier, but I'm back. So I actually was just filming a reel with one of our reporters who is doing a story about a local elementary school teacher who raised money for music instruments in their class. And I mean, that has everything that would make a popular video: colorful visuals, interesting subject, fun, lighthearted. People love like warm, stories. So I came with her to just film them. I'm comfortable doing them, but my goal really is to get more of our reporters out there, because one of the positive things I guess I've seen from us starting to do more video content is more people in public knowing about us and saying something, or like, oh, I saw you on Instagram. Like, I didn't know about you until then. So it's been a fun adventure so far. And even when my goal is to do more of them in the community to actually have like that kind of effect. But even just doing them in a radio booth and just showing where like the radio journalists sit and record their stuff has been just as effective, I think, in terms of showing who we are and what we do and portraying a story that way. One of our most popular reels that we've done is actually one that Holly was in, and it was our first one. And I look back at it, and while I did love doing that video, and it was a very interesting subject and it did well numbers wise, I do look back at it and be like, oh my God, there's so many things I would have done differently. One, in terms of just like style, making sure like the editing, like in between the videos, I'm not a big video editor, so now I've learned a few things to make them cleaner. I actually talked to some folks at the NPR team who do work on their reels, and I use Canva and now trying more Adobe Premiere, because it's just a more professional look. But that's why there's some like inconsistency, because to be honest, Canva is great. Like, I know some people aren't like the biggest fans of it, but I think it's been great, especially for a beginner who isn't as well versed in audio and video editing on Premiere. It gets the job done. So I think it's a great stepping stone to use, and it's great in terms of like having templates on there, and it just makes it easier to work with. But after talking to the NPR team, they use Adobe Premiere, and I do see how it can provide cleaner transitions, easier. So we do what they do in terms of like having reporters hold their mics and that showing when they're recording the video. And it does and then using that audio and replacing the camera audio, it does give cleaner audio, a way to build your brand when you are carrying that mic with the flag that says STLPR, brand recognition. And so it's been a good, fun adventure, I guess, to say so far.
I remember with that video, I thought you were really super prepared, because you had taken my story and like broken it down into scenes. So I think a tip from my perspective that I took away was think ahead. If you're unsure or you're starting out, think ahead about the scenes that you will do and what text will you be incorporated, where will that be, does it make sense? And you also took different angles of me. I actually was recognized by someone in a coffee shop off of that Instagram reel. But I think that was really interesting. What else do you do to prepare or think out how you're going to do, like, for example, the one today?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So I do make scripts for each video. In it, just like the subject, the focus of the story in general, and then the scene, like where are we going to be taking this? I know all of that in the document, and then the script. Now, the script isn't something that the reporters have to memorize, but it is handy for them to like look over, memorize if they can, just to make cleaner shots, and like we can do them all quicker, film the stuff quicker. And so having all of that ahead of time, it gives everybody, me and the reporters, a chance to think things through, make sure things are accurately represented, and to be honest, make things go quicker than just figuring things out because that was a rookie mistake in the beginning. Sometimes I would just show up and like film things, which was fine in the end, but it wasn't a streamlined process. So having a document, a Google Doc where everything laid out ahead of time helps a lot. So for today, for example, I had messaged the reporter. I was like, hey, she didn't write her story actually yet. This was when the teacher could meet with us. So I was like, send me whatever information you have. So she sent over that information. I worked it in, laid out all the details, laid out the script, and what potential questions we want to ask the subject, and showed up, filmed it all, and wrapped up.
Our NPR friends, are there any other tips or tactics that you would share if people are interested in trying this out?
I mean, I think Laura kind of laid it all out, would be some of the best ways to do it. But this is another thing that Britt and I don't control this part either. So we don't really, we can kind of pitch ideas, I guess, if it works out, but we don't really have much of a say in like how it looks. But I will say some of my favorites have been the ones that we've gotten a little bit more creative with, reporters in studio or outside somewhere on location. I've noticed those ones definitely get a lot of engagement and comments, and at least a little bit of a reaction, or when they see someone kind of out somewhere where news is breaking and having video feed there, seems to do very well. But yeah, I think Laura dropped a lot of great examples of kind of ideas to follow whenever you want to create a reel.
Also, one other last thing that just I thought of is recently we've started, on Instagram, there's that collab feature, like to invite collaborators. So the video will end up showing on your feed and whoever you invited, their feed as well, the same way. And we mainly do that with our political reporter because he's building his own brand on Instagram. Like he has his professional page. However, we started doing it with community. So we have a talk show, St. Louis on the Air, and twice we've done this now where we've invited collaborator and with the guest of that talk show. And these are guests who have prioritized social sharing as well. So they have their own big platform. And that's drawn a lot of followers for our talk show because our St. Louis on the Air Instagram is separate than the St. Louis Public Radio one. And that was a way to reach audiences that we originally weren't at. And then we got a lot of followers from that. So I don't know if NPR, like in general, can do that because it is pretty big. But I think for member stations, it's a great community building tool and a way to attract more followers that way.
And I also think a thing to remember, not just for St. Louis Public Radio, but for NPR as well, is that when you're looking at YouTube videos, I think a lot of times people, because if you don't have the training in video, I think a lot of it is this giant learning curve that Laura kind of experienced. Like, oh my God, I can't figure it out. I can't make it look like a sitcom, or I can't make it look like my favorite TikToker, or I can't make it. One of the biggest things on YouTube is somebody with a camera. What's his name? He's terrible. I think he's terrible. Is Steven Crowder or some of these other people. It's a camera pointed in the studio at the person, and people watch this show, and tons of people watch it. It doesn't have to be. You're not trying to make Gone with the Wind. You're not trying to make that. There are other ways to do it than what you see on TV news, and there are ways to do it on the cheap that takes less. And I understand there's a curve, and I'm very well past that curve, but there are ways to present things in a visual way that you're not playing video first. You're still doing the audio thing, but people listen to it. And you have to understand the way that people consume things, say like YouTube, even longer form. A lot of times it's on in the background of what they've got going on. They put it on and then they're off doing something else. They might just listen to it. They might look at it every once in a while. You don't always have to do what local news loves. It's like, oh, here's a fire. Ooh, here's a car accident 3 states away that you would never have heard. Why are you showing that? Who cares? But if you're talking about what people are going on, it's there. It exists. This is untapped. This is untapped. So thank you.
In general, I think social video viewers are much more forgiving about technique and how it's, they're much more interested in either the thing you're talking about, the fun, the humor, the behind the curtain look, and all of that. I wanted to just check touch base with Gabe for a second. KCUR uses Instagram for so I don't know if you'd call them explainers, but I think you've had some good engagement around those where you take a story and you basically break it down almost like in scenes. So like slide by slide in Instagram, telling a story. And I think other people have tried that too. Can you tell us a little bit about your strategy behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things about video is like we don't really have anyone like we have some producers on the audio side who like can handle video and usually do it for like big events, but no one who has the time and expertise to really like even edit a video to make it usable on the daily. And it's not something that sort of me or our social media producer like it's not our wheelhouse. And so like we've stayed away from that like realm. But the thing that we are able to do is we use Canva, like Laura was talking about, to basically stitch together stories fully told on Instagram or mostly told on Instagram. The idea being like, just like TikTok, Instagram is a place where it's not going to drive traffic. We don't need it to drive traffic. That's what our Google and newsletter strategy and other things are for. Instagram is a place for top of funnel people who can get and interact with our stories in the first place. And so by telling these stories as essentially full story, not just a photo, but like with a headline, and by sort of stringing together part of the story with good photos, we have templates that our graphic designers sort of initially whipped up that we've since adjusted, that are sort of preloaded into Canva with our logos to make it pretty easy for us to post breaking news, but also post some of our longer, weirder historical stories in that space. It doesn't require any reporters extra time, because that's one thing we've been hesitant to do, because our reporters are just so busy and strung out, like they're already recording stuff for a podcast, they're already trying to do all these things. And so our main goal, without any sort of extra social help, is like, okay, we're going to do things that don't require more work on the reporter side. So we just take their stories and essentially build them in an Instagram format, and those get hundreds of engagements, often dozens of comments. They're quite shareable. We see them getting passed around in Instagram stories. And we've been sort of very quickly growing our sort of Instagram following by telling those really good stories that are already really good, almost in full on Instagram. I like to say that we're treating Instagram as a second home page for KCUR, because we can deliver that information and deliver that sort of brand recognition and sort of relationship with KCUR fully on Instagram. So that's the way we've been approaching it there. And it's worked in our workflow, and it's been really good in breaking news scenarios, especially last week in the Ralph Yarl sort of shooting and fallout, when we were trying to get updating our live blog and other sorts of things. Posting on Instagram is something that doesn't require a link, so it doesn't require doing a new story. We can post updates there very quickly, and our sort of ability to use Instagram for breaking news scenarios is really strong. Those things will get passed around and sort of get appreciated even more than our Facebook or Twitter ever did. And so that's what we're sort of embracing now.
Thanks, Gabe. We still have a few minutes for questions. It could be about something we haven't even talked about. If you would love to get some insights before we get going here. I have a quick one. I wanted to know, maybe Britt and or Matt Adams can answer this. What is it about the Instagram platform that seems to make it ideally suited for the kind of storytelling that Gabe and Laura were talking about? I think we started Instagram in the world with beautiful photos, right? That was the thing, and now it's to me it's a surprising platform to be a news provider. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or theories about why that is. I think I'm often curious about the why.
So my theory is that businesses have really excelled at communicating short-term stuff on Instagram. Like if I want to know what the best special is in my neighborhood, I'm going to go through my reels to see who has, the best steak, whatever tonight. And I think because people expect to see something that's kind of in the short term, that helps with news because news is very much of the moment. So it is kind of like a natural place for us to be putting that information now.
That's good.
And I would think that you're going to be even better after the whatever the heck is happening with Twitter. And I think that people use Instagram even more now than because they might follow it already and they could trust it just as much as they would trust it as they had trusted anything previously on Twitter. And now that's a dumpster fire. So
Yeah. I was
Trust
gonna
is
say- Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, like, it's become the new home, right? Because previously Facebook was like the home for everybody to see all of your friends' content, involve yourself with brands, etc. But the Facebook algorithm, not trustworthy. Twitter algorithm, not trustworthy. So where can you actually have some perceived trust in social media content? And I would say, that's Instagram, and that could also change in the future as well. But I think also another part of it is that people also want to see things before they believe it. We know that a lot of people don't trust, what officials say. And so being able to see them say that or see a video of something allegedly happening will make people like trust the content more. But we'll definitely still have challenges going forward with like AI and stuff. But for now.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. If there are no questions, I'll give you back 2 minutes, but I just want to put it out there in case anybody does have any more questions. Again, I will share out the recording. It usually takes a bit of time for Zoom to process it. And then when I do that, I'll also share out Matt and Gabe's materials. And Britt and Matt Adams, thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights from NPR. If there's anything exciting we should be trying or any news, give us a heads up. We really appreciate you wanting to hear what we're doing and answering our questions. So very cool. All right, well, with that, I will say happy weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.